Welcome to the Big Brown Gadfly, where we give a hard time to people who need to be given a hard time, just like Socrates' horse. I am really sorry that I was not able to broadcast last week, but things were beyond my control. There was something that happened in Texas called a deep freeze snowstorm. It was miserable. It was like living in one of the circles of Dante's Infernos. But I am back now. I'm really excited to be able to talk to my guest today. His name is John Haskins. He is an Oxford graduate who got degrees in policy and mass media. He is the senior fellow for public understanding of law, propaganda, and cultural revolution at the Inter-American Institute for Philosophy, Government, and Social Thought. I'm sorry, that's a big mouthful, but it's a long-handed way of saying he's a really smart guy who has a lot to say. And I hope that everyone out there who's listening had a chance to listen to the broadcast we did with Eric Metaxas and John Zamirak. It was just a really excited, good time that we were able to broadcast that yesterday. That was Wednesday, February 24th. So now we're moving on to our next order of business. We talked about what it meant for people to be censored and erased from institutions of higher learning, and now I want to talk about what it means for men to be erased. I think the thing that I want to talk to John about is a phenomenon that I've noticed. I know other people have written on this, a lot of people have written on this, but I think it's still worth talking about. Are we as a society moving towards a model of humanity where the male is disposable? John, what do you think?
Well, I think we are now well over 100 years down that pathway, and the difficulty for all of us in recognizing how long ago that process began and how far we've moved is that we have no points of reference. We've lost all fixed reference points, and we've been moving along with the current, and we don't realize we're nowhere near the fixed reference points that made Western civilization possible.
What got us here? What was the biggest factor? I know people are going to jump up and blame feminism, which we can talk about and criticize all day long, but I'm also interested in other reasons why the male suddenly became disposable. And I'm coming from the perspective of having been very active in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I noticed that there is a kind of anti-masculine heterosexuality energy that goes on in the church that comes from men. There's something about a lot of the church men, very religious men, who seem to find male heterosexuality disgusting, and then they kind of combine with the worst puritanical impulses of feminists. Where did all this come from in your mind?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say what you're alluding to has been noticed by a large number of people throughout the last, especially the last half a century, and it is a great catastrophe, a much greater catastrophe than people realize, who are just sort of whining a little bit about feminism and not even understanding that everything around them is a form of feminism. Virtually everything in the church is a form of feminism. So we'll first have to look at what that means. What is feminism? And then if you want to get to the question of where this comes from, which you've just asked, we have to look deeper than politics and deeper than political ideology, because the politics and the political ideology of what we call feminism is only the superficial or the exoteric manifestation of something much, much deeper, something spiritual, something esoteric. And so you can see, if you think about it, whether or not one takes the Bible very seriously or not. You can at least look at it the way someone like Jordan Peterson does, who sees the power of myth and profound meaning, even though he wouldn't look at it the way you or I would. And so if you look at it in that way, and you have enough respect for the tremendous depth of insight, when you look at what happened in the Garden of Eden, you have a serpent coming, or the serpent in Hebrew means the enchanter, or the deceiver, essentially the enchanter. It doesn't have to be a snake. It doesn't even matter really in the story. And he says to Eve, look, this God dude, he's got all this toxic masculinity. He wants control. This is what we call now toxic masculinity. He wants to control. He wants to tell you right and wrong. But you have a bite of this fruit that he's told you not to touch, and you'll be like gods. You will be able to decide good and evil for yourself. So he's offering an alternate universe. And whether or not one take that story literally is sort of unimportant for the moment. What this is telling us is that we entered an alternate universe. Adam has the opportunity to veto this. And St. Paul writes centuries, millennia later, that Eve was deceived what Adam was not. Well, what does that mean? It means that Adam knew in his masculine frame of mind that what the serpent was saying was hogwash. It was false. Well, why did he capitulate? He capitulated for the sake of Eve. And you see throughout the Bible, you see all around you in the churches and in society and politics and the media, men capitulating to women, pandering to them, when they ought to know perfectly well that a lot of what's being said and done with women sort of, in control of the moral sense that we've got in society is very, very dangerous, very, very toxic. And so this is how, to switch from the Bible to the Greek analogy, this is the opening of Pandora's box. Pandora is Eve. She opens the box, and all sorts of terrible things come out. And everything that we look at in terms of the abolition of gender, of normal sexual experience and orientation, even the abolition of gender logically, if you can imagine,
right.
This, chopping off of body parts, and the denial that there is such a thing as male and female, and that the gender is binary. This is coming from the same Pandora's box.
Well,
and it comes from
no, I know. And one of the things that has struck me is that an early criticism from feminists was that people routinely used the term man to refer to humanity, and they had an objection to that. But I've realized now that the rejection of the masculine, and we can get into, we don't have all night, but we could get into all the realms where masculinity is being erased in the family court, in the school system, in the military, in government, in culture, in the church, etc. But I think that ultimately the rejection of masculinity is ironically the rejection of a version of the human. Even though the feminists complained that all of humanity was summarized by the word man, I think that what they were rejecting wasn't men or male sexism. They were actually rejecting the humanity. They were rejecting the concept of a universal humanity created by God and in ultimate obedience or disobedience to God's structured order. What do you think?
Well, you're absolutely right. And the famous book by C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man, is helpful here in the title specifically, because the abolition of manhood is, as you suggest, the abolition of mankind.
Right.
And you can't do one without the other. But looking at it from another perspective, mentioning Jordan Peterson again for no particular reason, but some of the things he said are useful. He's pointed out that from a perspective of psychoanalysis, and I'm not big on psychoanalysis, but I'll take insight wherever I can get it, the masculine mind is the mind that brings order and rationality, and the feminine mind, to the extent that you can dichotomize. It's not that intelligent people reduce everything to false dichotomies and it's all black and white, because men and women have much more in common than they have that separates them. But the differences are important to be aware of. And a society that denies them is a perverse and suicidal, self-destructive society. So when people understand that societies have always understood that the male mind archetypically and the female mind archetypically are distinct from each other in certain ways, then what happens when you destroy the masculine attributes of the mind? You lose rationality. You lose the sense of objective external fact. Everything becomes subjective. Because if you explore the dichotomy of masculine and feminine, and the Chinese had this insight with yin and yang, it's been understood in many different societies. So there's a reason why we speak of God in heaven as the Father and not the Mother. And the feminists want us to do goddess worship and to worship Mother Earth. Now, goddess worship historically has all kinds of irrationality. It's not possible to have modern science from a polytheistic system where people worship goddesses. It's well understood by historians of ideas and philosophers that modern science, for all of its flaws, did come out of monotheism, and more specifically out of Protestantism for reasons that are beyond this discussion. But when you reject the masculine and you reject manhood and masculinity, You are rejecting external reality. You are saying everything that is subjective triumphs everything that we used to think was objective. This we can call postmodernism.
Yes, I think there's a definite echoing of postmodernity.
So people don't actually believe that there's a truth out there. They only believe that it's their experience and their subjective sense that matters. You understand? But this is true not only on the political left. We need to be quite rigorously honest about it and realize that people who consider themselves to be anti-feminist are, in the larger sense, hardcore feminists by the standards of the past.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you, I grew up with a feminist. I was raised by a mother who was in a relationship with another woman during my childhood and during my adolescence. And having grown up with this disdain for the masculine, for anything that dealt with maleness or masculinity, it is very similar to what I hear from Christians. It's the same kind of, ew, that's so gross. Ew, that's so awful. And I've worked with churches where you have young men who have normal urges. They want to be with girls. They're horny. You know, they're young men growing up, coming into their sexual urges, and they are told that everything they do is so dirty that some of them find that they will get more of an embrace from the church if they say that they're trans and they come out as lesbians. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but there are large numbers of people for whom this is a reality. That the puritanical streak, which has always been the Achilles heel, it's always been the weakness on the devout Christian side, I think it echoes a lot of the same anti-male energy. And it brings to mind Nietzsche. I know that Nietzsche's not a great person to bring up in Christian circles, and I don't agree with his rejection necessarily of many Christian tenets, but I do think he had a point about the fact that the church was filled with what he called these pious little men who go around trying to make their failures piety by demonizing or turning into sin other men's ability to pursue what they want, to follow through on their ambitions, and to take responsibility and to take mastery over their circumstances and to not be victims. You know what I mean?
Oh, you've said so many good things here, Bobby. You've touched on so many things. And Nietzsche is, this is a surprise discovery to me, and a couple of my colleagues introduced me really to the value that Nietzsche does have to offer despite himself. Mm-hmm. One of them being Professor Paul Gottfried, his name you know. And Paul once said, you know, Nietzsche has no answers, which is true. He has no answers. But what Nietzsche does have, because Nietzsche's solutions, like those of Karl Marx, offering, you know, a solution to the grievous failures of capitalism. What Nietzsche offers no solutions, but he offers an unbelievable critique, a kind of almost prophetic critique of the decadent church.
Yes, yes.
Brilliant, and if the effeminacy that inevitably pervades the self-loathing of males, and associated with this, they're not aware that they loathe themselves. They're not aware that they're loathing masculinity. They've redefined it, and they've redefined Christ as essentially a transgendered person. You know, they've emasculated the Christ they worship is an emasculated Christ. And this means that when you're looking in the church and you're seeing this, you see people who literally do not know Christ. It doesn't even matter what their theology is. They do not experientially know Christ. They wouldn't recognize him on the street. Mm-hmm. You know, they wouldn't recognize him if he showed up to preach in their church or if they heard his voice. They would say, "Get behind me, Satan." You know,
right.
If the real Christ spoke to them. And the reason is they're worshiping an idol. They're worshiping essentially not exactly a goddess, but a androgynous, half male, half female deity.
Right.
And this is in the churches. I'm not even talking about the liberal churches, which have been beyond, seemingly beyond hope for decades. I'm talking the ones that boast of being biblically minded.
Right.
And one of I won't mention his name because I don't have his permission, but a well-known American preacher who's been around for many years, said to me several years ago, we were talking about this topic, and he referred to, the last, 40 years or so of his preaching in different kinds of churches, many different types, and he made a comment about, quote, the unbelievable effeminacy of the pastors. And there was just such disgust in his voice.
Well, I think the way, since I'm so happy to find out that you're tolerant of Nietzsche references. I was afraid that you were going to immediately smack me down once I brought him up. But I think
no,
you're.
Bob, as I say, even Marx had, when people ought to be honest, Marx had some extremely important critiques of
Right.
capitalism. The
Yeah.
problem is he was demonized. He was a demonic individual.
Yeah.
But
Right.
Nietzsche was even more profound, and
Right.
in his critique of
Yeah.
a decadent, materialistic, effeminate church is almost like an Old Testament prophet.
Right. It is, and I think the thing about it is, I have prayed and contemplated all of this for so long. I think that what it boils down to is God created an order of male and female, and the male was supposed to be the one who carried the burdens, and that's why Jesus Christ was a masculine figure. He carried on burdens. He had the strength to bear other people's problems and to endure them, and that is an integral part of forgiveness. Unless you have someone who has that masculine strength to endure and to bear people's burdens and to take other people's violence and to sublimate it, unless you have that role, you can't have mercy or forgiveness. And this is one of the things that I've seen, that often very female-centered causes, like the fight for justice for female sex abuse victims, or even the identity politics where a lot of women are leading it, and it's all combined through intersectionality with feminism, there is a noticeable lack of mercy or forgiveness. There, whenever sex abuse
from both genders.
Right. Both of them become unable. They don't understand that forgiveness is something that is expected of everybody. And so I think the male being the role that is bound to have to forgive and to have to take other people's burdens, and particularly to have to take women's burdens. I mean, the fact that in so many relationships, it's the male who has to go, do the work and everything, and listen to, the wife complain and not be the one who's complaining all the time, right? I think that is a role that people despise. They really despise someone who takes on other people's burdens, because it's like a red flag in front of a bull. It just makes people want to be even more oppressive and violent and hateful towards someone who does that. And so I've noticed that with all of the confusion about gender, all of the various gender movements are all running away from that particular role for masculinity. I think gay men always want to be victims, and I think that's part of the reason why a lot of them are trying to avoid women, because they don't want to be in a position where the other person in the relationship gets to be the victim and they don't. Do you see what I'm saying? And feminists are just, they are focusing a lot of their complaints on all the horrible things that men do. The female to male transgender community seems to consist of women who want to toy with being men but still want to cling to the right to be victims by claiming that they're transgender. And then, of course, the male to female transgender community is full of men who want to be the victim, even when they themselves as men committed violence and rape towards women. They still want to become women so that they can occupy that role. All of these people are trying to flee from the burden of being the one who can't complain, being the one who has to go on and carry on. And I think it is a very dangerous trend for civilization, for people in the military, for people in family court, for people in church, to basically say, we don't need a gender that has to play that role. They could say, well, we'll spread the responsibilities across everybody. But when you reject the masculine, what you're doing is you're saying that there is no gender, there is no half of humanity that just has to suck it up and deal and has to do their job, and they're not allowed to complain. Do you see what I'm saying? Once you
Yes, I do. I think that victimization is a dimension of it. And I think that we risk losing part of the audience with not translating the relevance of all the transgender stuff and also the homosexuality, bisexuality stuff. We don't translate that into what it means, where it comes from in relation to the perspective of people who are not in alternative lifestyles or whatever. Because my point that I've been making for about 15 years, Bobby, is that all of this is from that Pandora's box. That really it's almost like a Fukushima that keeps on giving. And we're downstream, and we're looking at we're measuring the toxic stuff, but we don't know what the source is upstream, and it's a Fukushima. And the Fukushima that's putting out all this, mutilation of the body and sexual deviancy and all of this stuff, self-loathing by males and self-loathing by females, but we're trapped in it. There's something upstream of this that unifies the things you've just alluded to with transgenderism and the things that are happening among, supposedly normal, healthy heterosexuals in the church or whatever, or, social conservatives who wring their hands and worry, but they're still disgendered in another sense, in a more abstract sense. They themselves are disgendered. And so in a way, I take issue with the idea of gender confusion, because I'll grant that in the case of kids. But by the time you get to people who are middle-aged, it's not so much that they're gender confused. If they're still in that vein, they are militantly waging war against natural gender. There is a confusion.
Well, and I think they're doing. I think it's driven by and large from just kind of an ennui, a lack of will. It's exactly what Nietzsche talked about. It's just they don't want to have to deal with the duty, the burden, the strain.
Among males, you mean, right?
Yeah. Well, and the females, of course, they never. I mean, even though they want to complain about discrimination, and every time they occupy a role that previously was largely reserved for men, they still want to reserve the right to complain and to accuse and to not be merciful and to not let things go. You know what I'm saying? They still want to be an aggrieved class. No matter where they go. And I think the white knights...
They want to be women. They want all the benefits of a woman in the traditional society, but they want all the power and glory of a woman who conquers, the career world or whatever. Right,
yeah. And then and we do have to wrap up. So I want to thank you so much for this conversation. There's so much we could go into. I wish we had more time. But I also think that the white knight, the heterosexual, regular old man who runs to the rescue of these feminists or whoever the crying out victim is, I think that that's another special class of their own. I think that they are people who, by and large, I've noticed with white knights, these are people who by and large do lack a certain amount of their own self-will. And so they want to turn that into some kind of piety by turning other men's by demonizing other men and by joining in with the grievances
and
against
other men.
It's a race
to the bottom, men betraying other men, trying to see who can undercut the other more by undercutting their masculinity. It's a betrayal. Men betray men on behalf of women.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, we will definitely... I'm going to have you on again sometime soon, John. Thank you so much. I really enjoy this, and thank you so much for joining. Is there a place where we can go? I know that the website for the Inter-American Institute is still under construction, but is there some place where...
reconstruction, yeah. We're not sure exactly how soon it'll be done. There's a sort of obsolete version of it, but we're not really giving the website out because it is a bit out of date.
Okay, is there a place where people can go to follow your work?
That would be the only place, actually. I mean, there are lots of interviews online, but you'd have to search a lot of podcasts and radio interviews. Not that many of them are online with our site down, but that's okay. I don't need to promote myself.
Okay, well, I'll have you on again, all right? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bobby.
All right, and we will be on next week on the Big Brown Gadfly, giving people a hard time who need to be given a hard time. Thank you.